And if you've just joined us, this is our 6th call, our episode on Abused and Brain Injury Toolkit, which is on the resource section in the Brain Injury Professional on Women versus Brain Injury. And I have one of the creators, Lynn, on today. And I was trying to imagine, look back, I can't, it seems like I've always known you. I think it's been close to 10 years now. And you also serve on the leadership committee of our domestic violence, intimate partner violence task force. So welcome to the show. And I'd like to open it up for you to share anything you'd like about your bio with the group. I can't hear you, Lynn.
Oh,
there you go.
Yeah, you're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me on and for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation and share the joy and the challenges with the work. I'm really pleased to be here. I've been doing the work for probably 6 or 7 years now, working with Dr. Angela Colantonio at the Acquired Brain Injury Research Lab in the University of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. We started doing this line of research because I just sort of came across it quite by accident, looking at some prevalence data on how many women were likely to be experiencing this particular injury. And I think the thing that really struck me about that was that because I come from a social work background, I'm a registered social worker and my PhD studies are in the field of social work. I understood how much that might be overlooked. How many of my colleagues were doing frontline work in the IPV sector, but who didn't really have a very comprehensive understanding of brain injury at all, or what that might mean for clients. So it became very clear to me very early on that this was not only a significant health problem that we weren't doing a lot of research on and we didn't have much of an understanding on, but even more importantly, in some ways, we probably weren't doing the best job of supporting it that we could be. And so it was that sort of recognition that really, I think, kind of nailed my feet to the floor a little bit, and I think has really captured my heart in terms of the work that I do and what I want to continue doing. And I was lucky enough that Dr. Colantonio also had a research interest in this area. She currently holds a research chair in looking at brain injury in marginalized and vulnerable groups. So it's a direct alignment into this work, and both of us, I think, feel very committed to move forward with it. So that's kind of how I got here, and why I'm still here. And I think it's a piece of work that people don't understand a lot. This intersection between survivors of intimate partner violence and brain injury, and I think the more that we can do to raise awareness and education on that, the better for everyone involved.
I so appreciate having you on the show. And so what I'd like to do is have you share your screen right now and give us, we'll spend maybe 15 minutes going through the website. And I think some people on the program may have seen you last year, actually it was, when the website launched on our task force call. So if you want to update anything about it in the year that you've had it, and then I definitely want to save, at least 5 or 6 minutes to talk about your work with horses at the end. So stay tuned for some more of Lynn's other side on horses. So we want to share your screen and we'll start looking at the website.
Sure. I did it once. Theoretically, I can do it again. Here we go. Is that up now? That's what you're seeing?
Yeah. So again, for our audience, who would you expect to use this website?
We designed the website to be an educational resource for frontline workers. That was our sort of key goal. We wanted to make sure that the people who were most likely to be offering direct support services to women survivors were educated in the existence of traumatic brain injury in this particular group and had a sense of how they might identify it and how they might go about supporting it.
What if you're not a frontline worker? What if you're a doctor in traumatic brain injury or a rehab person and you just want to learn about it?
The information doesn't change in that sense. It's useful information. We included a lot of the basics about brain injury. So we've got the Brain Injury 101 tab up here that you can see. We included care guidelines that are already existing. Um, that doesn't change whether you're an IPV service provider or you're a traumatic brain injury um, service provider. It also doesn't change if you're a survivor or you're a caregiver for a survivor. So when we built it, we spoke with a lot of frontline service providers directly offering IPV services because we wanted to make sure that they understood. But then when we put the information in and when we sort of organized it and the kind of language that we used, we included bits and pieces that would be relevant for other folks as well. You can see we have the stories section over here. That includes a lot of personal experience information, and we're making some changes to the toolkit right now that will shape this a little bit more even. I think in one of the things that we'd like to do is to start including a whole section that's really survivor oriented, so that the toolkit, it is valuable and useful now across discipline, but even so, more so that it will allow people to feel that it was meant for them and that it's a place that they can go as well.
And I just wanted you to point out also the quick exit, which is very important if you're in danger and you've looked on the website and you need to get out quickly.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure we were aware of the fact that this is widely available on the internet. There's no fee attached to it. Anybody can use it, and we were aware that that might well mean that women who were in a position of danger might come across it and might be interested in it. And so we built in these two little features. This one leads to directly to an organization that monitors all available shelter beds in Canada and can direct women to the closest shelter available to them. And this one, as you say, is the quick exit button. So that takes somebody right out. I think it goes to the local weather page or something to that effect, as well as information on how to clear your internet history.
That's
Um,
really very powerful to have that all up there. Now, what if what is the value outside of of Canada?
and that's a piece. Thanks for asking, that I wanted to bring forward. This is a Canadian item. It was designed on Canadian material. The brain injury 101 piece, it's not, again, brain injury is brain injury whether you live in the United States or in Canada or in Europe or anywhere else in the world. It's still the same. It's still the same health condition. Obviously the context changes and the sort of social surroundings change, and that has an impact for people, but the medical knowledge is still the same. In terms of the care guidelines, we've included guidelines that we had that were local to both Ontario, our province, as well as other areas in the country. And the community button, which directs people to local acquired brain injury services across the country, those both focus on Canadian resources. We were able to include some more international resources, and we welcome anybody who might think that their organization would be it would be relevant to add them to the toolkit and to add a link. We certainly entertain that option all the time. But we were able to source some existing toolkits that did investigate the intersection of traumatic brain injury and intimate partner violence. There's a New York one. There's a Pennsylvania one. I think there are three. I think there might have been one out of Arizona or Alabama. I'm not sure which. And we included those as well, so that people would have access to those and could get information that might be more relevant to their context. As well, we have links to Pink Concussions, to your organization, and to other organizations around the world that were sort of a good fit and could be helpful, could provide helpful information for people who might be on the site.
Is there a part of the website that is most meaningful to you that you'd like to show the audience? That
Um, I sort of, I want to be really upfront. I was a member of a team that put this forward. It had a lot of depth. We had a lot of community service partners that put a lot forward with this, and I don't want to take the credit for that, but it's sort of funny when you ask me that, because the whole thing it feels like my baby in many ways, and I feel really attached to it. And I love what we built collectively and how we did that. I really like the brain injury 101 section, because it allows for information that otherwise people wouldn't get. And we were able to put that in such a way to make it really, really easy. It's easy to get to for lay people to understand. We didn't want a lot of heavy duty research. We wanted frontline to be able to get information that they might need in a really quick way. You know, they're overworked. They got a lot of people on their waiting list. So we were able to do something like that, where at the same time we balance that off with our research section in the guidelines, where we have all of the available research at the time that we made this. I do have to upload this and add a few at the moment, but we have all of the available research on TBI and IPV. And I think we're probably one of the few places in the world that actually has collected all of this literature and put it into one spot so that people can access it. So I think one of the things I'm really proud about is that we managed to balance the needs of somebody who wanted really quick information. I just need to know, how do I support my client now, against the needs of somebody who has more time and more interest and really wanted to dig into the subject and become as knowledgeable on it as any of us.
And
Um,
I remember, I think we were in Toronto. All the conference rooms tend to blend, but it hadn't really launched yet. There was sort of a beta version, and you were talking about it having value if you had 5 minutes or you had 5 hours. And that's very hard to do, to create in a website, to have both those layers. And I think you've done an amazing job. And everyone on this call knows how strongly I feel about Canadian professionals, medical professionals, and Canadian research. And we've had a lot of Canadians on. So my question was more about the international value. And I think Canada has so much to bring to other places. And none of us want to reinvent the wheel. So I'm really grateful that you brought this out.
One of the things that we're talking about doing, I'm currently in the middle of a project where we're expanding and adding a couple of new modules. Will be including information on employment needs, and the sort of significant challenges that women are facing, both in maintaining employment that already exists, but also in getting a new job post IPV. So we'll add that section, and we're also looking at adding more information to our mental health section and giving more relevant material for survivors and caregivers, as well as service providers. But one of the things we've been talking about was, how could we expand and become a little bit more international? Are there ways in which that we could make links to other organizations and other websites, other toolkits, perhaps? I know that the work being done in Australia right now is phenomenal, and they're really leading the charge in many ways, and they've just put out some really good reports quite recently. And I think, you know, being able to include those reports in the toolkit and links out to them in that way is always really beneficial. So I need to put more time into making those links happen and seeing that work. We had a couple of people come to us early on and say, how come there's no information about IPV? And we said, well, because we're brain injury types. We assumed that people knew about IPV. But one of the things that they brought forward was that it would be a more valuable resource, interdisciplinary, if we did include some IPV information. So we've made those connections, and that's one of the changes that will happen in the new version that's coming out probably sometime early next spring, or early this spring, I guess. That will include links to projects that are geared towards intimate partner violence knowledge and education, so that we at least provide the sort of the pathway to that, even if we don't provide it ourselves.
And then to follow on that, I know that the Institute of Strangulation and Apoxia, there's a whole other side of this that is organized and has their websites beyond the brain injury. So how is strangulation connected to the site that you have?
We do have some specific information on strangulation. One of our community partners that was integral in this project and in designing this was they produced some of the first Canadian data on strangulation in the IPV community, and the implications of that. When I first met with them and discussed the idea of collaboration, they were right in the process of collecting data on that particular project, and they weren't aware of a connection between brain injury and intimate partner violence. And they were talking to me about the sorts of things that they were hearing from their participants. And I said, I think you might want to go back and have a look. I think you might find that that there's more likelihood of survivors having brain injury in this particular group that you're talking about than you're aware of. And it was exactly that case, that they thought that it wasn't really a relevant issue, but when they went back to their interviews and back through the data and looked at specific things that I said, just keep an eye out for these kinds of things, and they found quite quickly that in fact a majority of their participant group had in fact we're talking about the kinds of things that suggested that brain injury was certainly a part of their experience. So I think part of what we know about strangulation is that it is different from traumatic brain injury. It has its own particular classification in the brain injury world, but it is a part of intimate partner violence just as much as TBI is. It's something that we need to be aware of. And from my perspective, I tend to bring the two together a lot and just include them together. I think I don't like that separation. I understand that we need the separation from a scientific perspective, but I think from a practice perspective and from a support perspective, we can really consider them to be interchangeable in many ways.
Absolutely. And along with that is the other, it almost feels like silo when you look at domestic violence and partner violence. Last week we had Stephen Casper on. He was talking about the history of research on women and brain injury, and we were talking about the punch drunk wife, and talking about how the lens with women and abuse has always sort of been from the mental health perspective of psychological, and she's traumatized, needs to be put on medication. And it seems like we have these three silos of mental health, brain injury, and strangulation. And I see in the future them all weaving back in together, along with the legal and the economic and the other issues out there, because it's such an intense topic with so many different parts. But I know that you mentioned something about mental health in this also.
Mental health is, it moves hand in hand with brain injury. We know that folks who are dealing with traumatic brain injuries and acquired brain injuries, they're often dealing with mental health challenges at the same time. Sometimes the mental health issue is predating, and it leaves them more open to a traumatic brain injury. Sometimes it's an impact of the brain injury itself. We know that this is something that is often happening at the same time. I think the challenge for this particular group is that historically what's happened is that many women experiencing IPV have been diagnosed as having mental health challenges, PTSD, post-traumatic stress. That's a huge sort of piece of the IPV community, depression, anxiety. But part of the challenge is that so much of traumatic brain injury looks an awful lot like post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's very, very difficult to tease those two apart. In this particular group of survivors, I would expect to see a high rate of both conditions happening at the same time. It's not unreasonable to experience, I mean, if you experience a traumatic event like your partner assaulting you, that's quite often going to lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. That's perfectly reasonable to me. The problem is that if we only focus on the mental health challenges and we only conceptualize and we only look at it through that lens, we miss out on all the things that are happening under the TBI piece that can be addressed and supported. We have a tremendous wealth of knowledge and understanding about traumatic brain injury at this point. There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of really valuable work that's been done. We have understanding, we have treatment options, we have rehabilitation, successful rehabilitation approaches that we know work in traumatic brain injury, where we can have a direct impact on outcome post-injury. And if we're not offering any of those to these survivors because we have classified it as a mental health challenge and we're just pushing them off into that stream, then we're really doing a disservice. It isn't that I want to say, don't think about mental health. That's not it at all. I just want to make sure that the brain injury piece is considered and understood, and then you move forward treating both or whatever conditions are there working to support a survivor on all levels possible, and really seeing, you mentioned that complexity piece. I think that's there are two things that make this such a difficult world to work in. One is that no two injuries are the same ever in brain injury. It's always a unique situation. And then you layer on top that no two women are the same, no two contexts are the same. You complicate all of that with social structures in place. So you really have a case by case basis, and you really need to approach it that way. And then you layer on top of that just the complexity of brain injury and IPV individually, but you put them together and you have this sort of kaleidoscope effect where you just change it just the littlest bit and you have a whole different picture.
Right.
But if you never see half of the picture, how do you possibly effectively intervene and support?
And I love the intro video that talks about the strengths, because every woman has different strengths, and you add that into your kaleidoscope of, what are the strengths that each woman can pull on. I'm aware of time, and I could talk to you for hours about this, and I wanted to let some time. You gave up being with your horses today, so I did want you. I want to encourage everybody to check out the Abused and Brain Injured website. There's so much there, and it's very easy to navigate. So I'd like to have you speak 3 or 4 minutes about your horses and what you do with your horses.
Sure, I'll just stop sharing the screen so that I can see faces on my screen, which is always nice. When I do practice, which isn't as much as I used to, or as much as I'd like to in many ways, and COVID has certainly had an impact on that too. I practice a particular form of therapy that's called equine facilitated therapy. So my therapeutic partner in any given session is a horse, and my clients come to me and we work in an open space, sort of a 60-foot round pen. So a contained area, but it's an open space and the horse is at liberty. Nobody's getting on the horse at any time. It's all done from the ground, which is really helpful because that allows for a broader application within a disability group. So I really like that about the work. And really, I think my job is about interpreting my horse for the client, and I think what it does is it opens spaces that might not otherwise be available. There's a lot of judgment that happens in a therapeutic environment, even when a practitioner is aware of that and is working against it and is trying to unpack that. We're in a position of power. There's no getting around that, and I think the beauty of working with the horses is they don't judge. They're just there. They open these spaces for possibility to explore something that a client is needing to explore, and they give us a mechanism to do that offers unconditional support and kindness in their own way. And I think really the best sessions happen when I step back and let the client interact fully with the horses. We have a series of specific exercises that we can choose from that the horses are all trained in. And each of them sort of unlocks a different kind of psychological or emotional or sort of skill development kind of opportunity. And really, it just works best when I stay out of the way and sort of interject every now and again and sort of raise awareness in the client. I'll say something like, oh, that's my horse's choice is interesting there. It seems to me like they might be doing this. What's that like for you? Or do you see, my horse just backed away from you. How does that feel? Do you have a sense of why that might be? Or, and just sort of unpacking things with a client that way.
That's really fascinating. I've read case studies with combat veterans, the VA, and equine therapy, mostly with men. Is there a difference with equine therapy with women that you've seen?
That's a really interesting question.
Same question I always ask everyone all over the world.
That's a really interesting question.
Do you know of other therapists using this with women? Because what I see in the research is combat.
There is a program here that's looking more at, they sort of moved away from combat and they're looking at PTSD. So they're looking at it in terms of trauma exposure. It's a particularly effective modality for people who've experienced trauma. So there are so many different ways that that could happen. I think it's probably, the differences have probably got to do with gender, in the sense that there are sort of socially constructed norms around that whole piece about emotions. How are men socialized to feel and talk about and experience emotion rather than women? And I mean, these are massive generalizations, so I wouldn't want to hang an awful lot of anything on them. I think it's an individual. Does any one individual feel comfortable moving through those spaces for themselves more than another? And that might be gender related, but it might also not be. There may be other things that are equally important. Interestingly enough, most of my client base are women, not men, historically. So I actually have to think, well, what would it be like working with men, or what are the men that I have worked with like? And extrapolate from that. So I think the sort of the early literature was looking at trauma survivors who were most likely going to be men, because there were veterans. There were also first responders. There's been quite a bit of research looking at first responders. Tends to be, right, it's male police officers. So there's probably more men than women in that group too. But the more we expand where the likelihood of becoming traumatized comes from, the more we're going to see a difference there.
Well, you're fascinating, and I could go do 4 or 5 hours with you. We're at the end of our chat time, and I wanted to open up. There's so many people, and I appreciate how many things that are going on right now. I'm just exhausted from yesterday and all the screen time yesterday. So the fact that you came on and joined us today just really means so much to me. And Lynn's amazing, and so many, just a great person, and I think you can hear her passion about helping women, people that are abused, and her horse work. So if you have any questions and just being a cool Canadian, I miss going to Canada. So if you want to take your mic off and ask a question, we'll have 15 or 20 minutes to ask some questions of Lynn. And it's kind of first come, first serve.
Super, thank you.
Anyone have a question?
I'm going to speak up. My name is Wendy Waldman, and I'm in Indiana. I am the Brain Injury Continuum Outreach Manager at Rehab Hospital of Indiana, and I'm also the president of the Brain Injury Association of Indiana, and I'm involved with ACRM. I'm on the brain injury, the chronic brain injury task force, but I get emails. I know Pink Concussions. I've sat with members of your Dr. Catherine from your task force before. So I'm really happy to be on these. And I just wanted to say, I was on the last one too. I jumped on late, and this one late a little bit, but we are starting to, so yesterday, actually, I was on a call. We are looking for grants to work with IPV and brain injury. So a lot of the grants, you have to be TBI specific, but strangulation is a huge problem. So lots of people that have a TBI, we're also asking the anoxic and strangulation questions. And we've changed, I know that there's been lots of studies, and we use some studies. Oh my God, I can't remember everyone that's involved with the studies. And I know that they're all, you guys would know these people, but that for the screening tool we're using. So we took the OSU screening, the revised OSU screening, and adapted it to add questions from Ohio is doing a lot of stuff. If you know the Ohio Domestic Valley Network.
Rachel is part of our leadership group. I don't see Rachel on today, but yeah, we're very familiar with Rachel.
So Rachel and I are talking a lot, and we've been consulting. And so we've used Rachel's chats tool and added some of those strangulation questions to the Ohio tool. And today, I get a lot of individuals with brain injury that contact me, but today I got one from a woman that for 10 years, she's 34, but for 10 years, was strangled multiple times. That was his main way of getting her. And she talked to me, this was the first time where the blood in the eyes, bleeding from the ears. So we're changing our tool because of all of this. And so I didn't know, I looked on your website really quick. What do you teach for screening? Is there anything you think, like we were told to talk about defecation, and like, I guess when you get strangled, oftentimes you let go of your bowels. So what screening tools, and do you have any advice for a brain injury group we're working with a domestic violence group to create something?
Wendy, first let me say, yay. I'm so glad to hear that there are brain injury groups that are reaching out to the IPV community and vice versa. This is something that I think is really, really important. We absolutely need to be building more bridges in between those two camps. I think that's the way forward, and that's the way that we can capitalize on really deep pools of knowledge that already exist in both of these areas. We just need to get everybody talking to each other. So you're already so far ahead of the curve on this. I think it's fantastic. You're also really obviously up to date on what we've got in terms of screening tools. This is a hot topic amongst the researchers, amongst frontline. You know, what should we be doing about screening? If we're going to do that, have we already got a tool that we can use? If we don't have a tool, should we be adapting? What should we be using? I know about Rachel's chats tool. I love it. I think she's got some really good adaptations in there. I've always been a fan of the OSU. I think it's a really good screening tool. I did co-publish a paper with Halina Golden on that in 2016. And the authors on that paper, we all felt that the OSU was really, really high up there on the ones to go to in terms of an adaptation, but it did have all the brain injury screening tools that we have to date have a drawback in that they are not trauma informed. They were never designed to be used in a trauma environment, and they've never been tested that way. And the closest we've gotten to that is a modification on the HELPS tool. And I like that modification too. One of my colleagues, Dr. Amanda St. Ivany, and we spend hours on this conversation, and I know Amanda's on the line today, and she may well want to jump in and straighten me out on this one. But I think one of the things that Amanda and I believe is really, really critically important is an understanding of lifetime exposure to traumatic brain injury. And part of the reason that we feel that way is that it's a couple of things. You touched on it a little bit. One is that these women are often exposed to repetitive, significantly violent events over a long period of time. And the impact of that, as we know in the brain injury world, it is cumulative and it is exponential. And there are long-term health implications about that. And if we only ever ask questions about the incident that brought somebody in the door now, we're missing a huge piece of the puzzle. The other reason that both of us, I think, feel that this is really critical, that needs to get rolled in, is that we know that being a survivor of traumatic brain injury increases your risk of exposure to intimate partner violence. Mm-hmm. That's true about all disability for women, but particularly for brain injury in many ways. And I think to assume that it's always the intimate partner violence first causing the brain injury, that's a simplification. And again, we're going to miss out on key pieces of information. We also miss out on a group of women that we should be doing some work with in terms of prevention. We could be doing a little bit better there. So for me, I think the whole conversation around screening, it's a tough one. When I talk to folks on the front line, I talk to them about, listen, it's really less about a diagnosing for treatment right now than it is about identifying for accommodation and support. I need to understand the realities of the experience for the person who's asking me for my help, no matter what my capacity is, no matter what discipline I'm coming from. And until I can do that, I'm going to miss a major piece of the puzzle with this issue. So as far as I'm concerned, we just need to get everybody up to speed, understanding that the intersection exists. Any of those tools, the HELPS tool, the chats tool, the OSU, they're all going to educate you about the kinds of pieces of information that you need in order to be able to make a sound judgment that probably you're dealing with more to this picture than you might otherwise be. And now what do you do about that? Until we've got more coordinated brain injury services that are trauma informed, and we've got more IPV frontline that knows what they're looking at, I'm less concerned about how do we screen for diagnosis and what screening tool do we have. But that's just that's my 2 cents. And it does come from a lot of consultation with a lot of frontline and with a lot of survivors who've really raised, there's a lot of difficulty around this. It increases their risk in many ways. And if we can't support them properly post identification or post diagnosis, why are we doing it?
I do see Amanda on the lower corner there. Amanda, do you want to add anything? There she goes.
There I go. I'll turn on my camera. I'll just say, Lynn, you did an excellent job.
Call you in since you signed in with your name. You signed in with your name, you're fair game.
Yeah, it's true. Lynn did an excellent job with the summary. And the only thing I would add is, having done this work for a while and interviewing survivors, a lot of, not just survivors, people have multiple history of traumatic brain injury or some type of head injury that doesn't even register as having a previous history of some type of head injury that could be affecting them in ways that we're missing if we're only screening for the IPV related TBI.
Thank you,
I get it,
read
Lynn?
your article, actually.
Okay.
So I definitely, now that it was Dr. Golden, it was Elena, and I've read your research. So thank you.
Yeah, it's, I so much wish that we had a quick and simple answer to that question, Wendy. I can't tell you how often I hear it. Pretty much every conversation that I have anything to do with, somebody wants to know about screening. And I think we're really close in the research world to being able to have a more useful answer for you. We're just not quite there yet. And I think most of us in this field, we want to do this right. We want to make sure that we're honoring survivors, that we're doing what is best for their health moving forward, and that we're doing that in such a way that it's possible for frontline in whatever context to be able to apply it effectively. So, I know we keep saying, please be patient with us, but on this one, we're doing our best to get it right.
And there's so many more people working on the topic, just in the, and I've only been in this space for about 10 years. And the number of people that are looking at this, and every time there are intersections of different doctors, different researchers, different frontline workers. So I really do believe that, hold on, we're getting there. It is sincere because more and more people are coming together, and a consensus on a tool that's updated will really help. So what she says is true.
Yeah, we're right on the edge.
Does anybody else? We're on the edge. Anybody else have another question? Cara?
I wanted to just ask about the role that you see in, I think that excellent, like the diagnosis and the awareness is incredible, but I think navigation of healthcare, access to rehabilitation and treatment, just because it's so just holistic, all of the issues, that are caused, and everything from cognitive to neuropsych to OT to PT, like just in terms of helping women who are often dependent financially in every way, so in order to be able to physically escape, but then get access to care and rehabilitate and vocational in every way, I guess, what is your, position or strategies, that you.
And I think there's a second part to Cara's question, because I think I hear a fear of, as a worker, what if I identify this, there's no help for it. So why should I identify it in the first place? If I don't have a resource, if I don't have an MRI open or a 1-year research, a 1-year rehab program, why am I even looking at this for my client?
Exactly. So to get the diagnosis of any disease, but especially something like this, is really scary if you have no idea what the next steps are in order to help yourself, to rehabilitate.
I think that, first of all, let me say that coming from Canada, I have a little bit of a different sort of perspective on this than lots of folks might in the US, because we have quite a different system in terms of how we deliver healthcare services. So, but I will say, I think, and it's why I started out by answering Wendy saying, yay, right? Because I think what they're doing is where we need to go. We need to, I used to say that we needed to break down the silos, and I'm not so sure about that anymore. I'm starting to change my way of thinking and to think about how we need to build bridges between the silos. Those silos contain vast quantities of knowledge and education about highly specialized pieces.
Hi, how are you?
So,
I'm good. How are you? I'm good, thank you.
Kelly, I think you might have your microphone on.
I was just listening to a webinar.
So I think the issue there is let's recognize that those silos contain really valuable pieces of information and figure out how we get the silos talking to one another. And the key to that in many ways for me is what I call these days the navigator role. We need people who understand how the systems work and understand what's available in terms of support interventions and how we might be able to link people through those roles. Mm-hmm. And those are the kinds of people that I'd like to see embedded in the support organizations across both ABI and IPV. It seems to me like those are the sort of, they're kind of like guardian angels, you know, they're the ones who have all the knowledge pieces and the relationships and can start putting them to work. It's like a case management system. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, I guess I'm influenced towards that from somebody who's doing work in the US. You've got a fantastic organization called the Barrow Institute, which has been doing outreach work. They're a brain injury service provider. They've been doing outreach work within the IPV community for 8 or 10 years now. They started with direct referral in from 1 or 2 partner organizations who were offering shelter services. And they've been able to expand that over the years. They now have an outreach program where they're going out into the community. They're sending an occupational therapist out into the community to offer support and services that way. And I think there's a model that, you know, it's homegrown in the sense that this is something that came out of the US. I believe it's Arizona, but I could be wrong on that. It's Barrow as in the wheelbarrow.
Mm-hmm. It is Arizona.
It is Arizona, right. And I think that's a super place. If you want to look at how could we be, you know, what kind of services do we need and how could we be making it, there's one to model from.
They were our 2016 Pink Concussions Awards, Glennis and Ashley.
Yeah, Ashley Bridewell and Glennis Zeman. Right. They're just, you know, it's a phenomenal program. And as far as I know, it's unique in the US. We do have a couple of programs up here north of your border. The Cridge Center in Victoria, British Columbia, amazing organization that has been offering both IPV services and TBI services separately for the last 30 years. In the last 5 years, since they started working in collaboration with us, they have recognized that these two needed to be integrated, and they now run a program where they're cross-training within their organization, and they have hired those navigator roles. So that's starting to be something that we're seeing here. We're looking to expand that with them and see if we can scale that up on some way. But those are the kinds of models that I would look to replicate and I think have the best chance of doing what you're talking about.
Thank you, Cara. We probably have time for 2 quick questions. Does someone else want to unmic and ask Lynn a question? Anybody have any horse questions? I think one of the fears is that if you don't have those services and you don't have the navigator and all you're going to do is you know, a screening tool and then just start suggesting that there might be a brain injury, you know, could you speak to the value of that, just the fact of empowering a woman with that knowledge and how you know, that can start a journey?
I think there are 2 reasons to continue to push for this kind of approach, even if you don't have a lot of services to refer out to, even if you think that the support for somebody is not as robust as you'd want it to be, or even if you think that their risk is increased. The empowerment piece is huge. It's very isolating. There's a lot of stigma attached to IPV alone, but there's a ton of it attached to TBI and disability as well. It feels it's happening inside. It's often not visible. People don't believe you. It's hard to prove in many ways. And just knowing what's happening and knowing that other people have experienced it is empowering. It takes away a lot of the stress of what you think is happening to you. And I think that's really, that is a strong argument for moving forward with identification and discussion around this, even if you can't fix it in that sense. The other reason I think is that there are a lot of things that can be done to support women survivors of intimate partner violence who also have traumatic brain injury, that don't need a professional outside of their office, that don't need referral out, that don't cost money. Change the environment a little bit, reduce some of the distractions, lower your lights, keep your sound quiet, take a quiet space, don't have a lot of visual stimulus in the room. There are memory tricks that you can encourage. Try to encourage people to write things down. Take 3 sessions to cover material instead of 1 session. Follow up with a client to help them remember what their homework might have been or when their next appointment is. All of those things are very legitimate challenges for somebody coping with a traumatic brain injury, that if you miss them in the woman who's here because she's fleeing violence, you're only going to frustrate each other. It reduces the relationship, the care relationship between you. And I think it makes it much harder for people to receive support. So I always say, there's like a list of things that you can do in your organization to make it better for women. You can do it. You don't have to screen. You can just assume that every woman walking in the door probably has a TBI, and we're going to implement these changes across the board in a universal design so that everybody has access to this kind of service. Who doesn't want a nice, peaceful, calm environment to discuss difficult things in?
Right. Or a text reminder that morning that you have an appointment that day. I know that the VA, when the VA instituted morning text messages about the time of day that, you have an appointment today at 11. I purposely don't make appointments on Mondays usually because that's the day where I'm kind of organizing myself for the week. The 9 o'clock dentist appointment for me on a Monday, it's a big chance I'm not going to get there. So
yeah. And that's, that's the case for lots of people for lots of different reasons. So if we adopted this kind of universal design, understanding that we were hoping to catch this large group of women who are suffering from these dual conditions, we're just improving care in many ways across the board. And these can be done. It has a lot of positive impact. We hear back from frontline saying, well, that made a difference. All I did was change the fact that there were people coming and going outside the door. And all of a sudden now the person can concentrate. And I said, well, yeah. And it's that simple.
I do think that's true. I have a son that has ADHD, and I would bring in for the teacher a modification for the classroom, and she would always say, well, that's great, let's do it for all the students. So I think there are things out there that we can look to as an organization that don't cost any money, that might help everybody have a lighting, time frames, the noise behind. So I really want to again, we're at the end of our time together. It's always too short. I appreciate that everybody, there's a whole chat room going on, people speaking, people turning their cameras on, people just showing up. I appreciate all the men that show up week after week. I honor that you're taking your time to what is not completely, but very much a female focused topic. And thank you for being here for that. Lynn, I wanted to give you last 2 minutes to kind of round up your thoughts. I appreciate you taking time, and I know you missed your horses today to be here, so I'm grateful.
They'll survive. I thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's been a lot of fun. I wish we had more time. I'm happy to people can reach out to me. Catherine's got contact information for me, so if you have questions or comments, or you'd like to add something to the toolkit, or you think there's something that we could have done better or done differently, please let us know. I'm glad we made the toolkit. I think it's really useful for folks, and I hope that each of you find a way to to come to terms with it and work your way through it and see what you like about it. So I encourage folks to do that. And I thank all of you for being here and being interested in the topic and wanting to improve circumstances. This is both of these two unique groups are deserving of your time and energy, no doubt. And for the folks where it happens all in one package, it's something that, you know, we really need to do better where we can. And I'm grateful that everybody is pitching in like this. It's wonderful to see. I think, as you mentioned, you know, the growth in this area in the last 5 or 6 years since I started working in it is really, it's astounding. It's happened so fast, and we have some super people working in the various sectors, and I love what I do, and I'm really happy to see everybody else is getting on board. Super.
You're such an amazing person, and I appreciate your time today. I appreciate everybody spending time with us. Next week, we're going to switch gears. I know we've been talking about domestic violence, IPV, for the last couple of weeks. We're going to switch gears next week to talk to a really interesting researcher who's going to talk about John Leddy and Buffalo Protocol, exercise, female athletes, exercise in general as a rehab tool, what benefits women may or may not have from that, and appreciate all your time. Again, I do want to acknowledge that IPV, domestic violence, happens to men and women of all cultures, all colors, all ages, and if any point we made mention of, you know, this only happens to women or only a certain type of women, it's just in the way that we're trying to create the conversation, but we do acknowledge that this is a universal experience, and there may be groups out there that we're not identifying right now that are very much in need of help, and if we offended in any way, that was not our intent. So thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. We're done with elections in the United States. Hopefully Wednesdays will be quiet now, because it's been a lot going on. I feel like we've already been through a whole year in about 3 weeks. So thank you, stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.